New figures from the campaign group MyDeath-MyDecision has revealed 30% of people who travel to Switzerland for an assisted death do so without police's knowledge.
Assisting a suicide in England and Wales is punishable by up to 14 years in jail. But there are some who think it is time to reform the law.
Joining us now to discuss this is Dr. Henry Marsh, who, after being diagnosed with prostate cancer 6 months ago, is calling for an urgent inquiry into assisted dying, and Dr. Mark Pickering, who says assisted dying cannot be a choice. Thank you both for joining us. Henry Marsh, I'll come to you first. How are you feeling right now, and how is your condition and prognosis at the moment?
My cancer is advanced by definition, but is treatable, possibly not curable. The slight sort of irony, for want of a better word, in my case is I operated upon many men in the years of my career with prostate cancer, which had spread to the spine. And even despite surgery, usually these people end up paralyzed and doubly incontinent, bedridden before they die. So that is a realistic possibility in my case, and it's not a prospect I view with great pleasure. And we all have to die sooner or later, obviously. It comes to us all. But I feel very, very strongly, I would like to know I had the option of choosing when and where I was going to die, when my disease reaches a terminal state. At the moment in this country, we have euthanasia without consent. So-called terminal sedation, the pretense being that people will be dying, people are given such large doses of opiates that they will actually die from it. But the intent is not to kill them. So the law has this strange fudge that you judge an action not by its consequences, but by intent. Now, in many countries now, in recent years, Canada, Spain, New Zealand have all legalized assisted dying. We're no longer in an evidence-free zone, and the evidence is pretty clear that the objections to it, which are largely hypothetical, are not borne out in practice. So what we need in this country, and this is what personally I am campaigning for, and also the organization MyDeath-MyDecision, and also Dignity with Dying, is for an official inquiry so that all these questions can be discussed in the open. Yeah. There are many ways of organizing assisted dying. We need an open, honest discussion to discuss what might be appropriate in this country.
You're a surgeon, so you have already, a very honest approach to our own mortality, because you have operated on people and you've seen people die. Yes. It is a subject that many people find unpalatable to talk about, but now it is affecting you personally. You're facing your own mortality and dealing with that in an incredibly courageous way, and grasping the nettle of this very difficult subject, the subject of assisted dying. In an ideal world, Henry Marsh, what would you choose to do for yourself?
First of all, we never know what we'll choose until it happens to us. So until I'm entering the terminal stage of my disease, I don't know what I would decide. And I know many anecdotal stories, mainly of doctors who said, I'm determined to take my own life, who then, when the end comes, don't. And that's borne out in countries like in Oregon in America. Many people who express an interest in assisted dying don't take it up when the end comes. But it is quite clear to me the most humane, safe, clear and transparent way of dealing with this problem is what's being done in Canada, which is very clear legislation, which is actually safer than what we have in this country, because people will no longer have to kill 300 people every year kill themselves in England because they have terminal disease. If you had the Canadian legislation, palliative care is mandated to make sure it's clearly discussed. We're not talking about suicide on demand. It's not you say, I want the suicide pill, I want to die. Instead, you use counseling, discussion. It is a decision made over a period of weeks before perhaps the death is assisted. And this seems to me a much more sensible, transparent, and compassionate arrangement than the muddle we have in this country at the moment.
Dr. Mark Pickering, you're a doctor as well and campaigner for Care Not Killing. When you are dealing with something in the way that Dr. Henry Marsh is dealing with it, you can understand why you would have a need to discuss this openly and perhaps start to look at a change in the law. And the key word I think he uses is compassion. You know, we want to be compassionate for people who are facing a grim end.
Absolutely, and we have to have a lot of compassion. There's no doubt that our current situation enables great compassion. I think I want to take issue with a number of the things that Dr. Marsh has said. For instance, in Canada, palliative care may be mandated, but it's not funded. There are cases of people who would like to have palliative care for their terminal illness, and they've been told by their provider, we can't afford that, but we can fund your assisted suicide. And in Oregon, more than 50% of the people who actually die under the Death with Dignity Act list feeling a burden as one of the main reasons that's motivated them. So my main concern is not about the fiercely independent professional people like Dr. Marsh, who of course have fears and anxieties about death. That's natural. But it's about the people who aren't used to being in control, who are used to feeling a burden and thinking, well, you know, maybe I should just slip away and stop being a burden on my family. And that's the real concern. It's about safety for the more vulnerable population, not the more vocal people that we see campaigning.
But it's about people's right at the same time as well, isn't it? So, and I understand it's such a difficult one. I think people at home will be really debating this, and there's no right or wrong answer. But the one thing, it is about someone's right, and I guess you never know until you're in that position for yourself. But how do we support that? Support the very human right to choose what to do, and in Canada, I hear what you're saying about the funding, and that sounds like a real issue that would need to be addressed. But it feels that decision isn't made overnight. There are weeks of consultation that goes on. That feels about right, doesn't it?
Well, I think there's lots of chance for consultation. But I think you also see in places where the law has changed, you see doctor shopping. So if you see someone who does want to get it done relatively quickly, they can go and find a doctor generally who will agree with them and get that done. And it's not always part of this long-term caring relationship with the family doctor who knows you. Often it can be quicker than that. And we've seen also in a number of legislations, some of these cooling off clauses have been remitted afterwards because there is sometimes a desire to speed things up. And you also said about suicide, because we talked about the fear of people who commit suicide whilst terminally ill. The evidence from these jurisdictions shows that actually once you normalize suicide by saying it's okay for us to help you kill yourself in certain situations, whether it's physical pain or mental pain, the collateral suicides actually go up. We've seen that in Holland, and you know that's Dr. Marsh wants evidence. There is evidence. There is an increase in other suicides as well.
In one country, but not in others. In other countries.
Okay, Dr. Henry Marsh.
Yeah. The evidence is increasing the suicide rate. There was a very slight increase in Holland, is reduced in Oregon. As to the burden argument, that was research in Oregon. 50% of people quoted being a burden. 90% said it was a loss of autonomy. And again, there's an opinion polls in this country have shown again and again a majority of people favour some sort of assisted dying, which is why we need a national debate and a public inquiry. Yeah, the members of Parliament who rejected the bill 6 years ago, the campaigners against assisted dying are completely out of touch with public opinion. So they've failed to persuade the public. So surely they should agree to a public inquiry so they can try to persuade the public that they're mistaken. And in fact, it should not be legalised.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Henry Marsh, we really appreciate you talking to us this morning and your courage in dealing with what you're facing, and Dr. Mark Pickering as well.
Yeah.
It is one of the most ethically sensitive topics we can possibly discuss.
I have to say, though, just on people who've got in touch with the show, and I wonder whether the people who are more supportive of it are likely to tweet or get in touch, but there's been a lot of support for Henry Marsh's point of view. Gemma on Twitter says, assisted dying laws should be looked into. My gran has advanced Alzheimer's and is in a home, and she cries because she hates what has become of her. She should have been allowed the dignity of choosing her own exit, not waiting for the end like this. It's inhumane. It's a very powerful argument.
The issue with dementia, of course, is that you are unable to provide consent,
Absolutely.
and so that would be a barrier.
It's a very difficult situation for everybody concerned.
Yeah.
Michael on Twitter says, if you're dying from an illness and you want to go before it ends your life, then it should not be a criminal offence. Let them go with dignity. And a lot of people effectively saying pretty much the same thing on Twitter. But there will be other people who probably haven't tweeted who feel against it.